Hello, everybody. Right off the bat, thank you for staying. Really, thank you. Go ahead.
Now that Todd has your attention, I'm Kristina Meinking. I'm a professor in the Department of World Languages and Cultures. I teach classical languages, classical mythology, other assorted, ancient, yet still very relevant things. Because I don't have a fancy title, like Todd's Faculty Fellow of Technology, I'm also apparently the podcast prodigy. So I'm eager to tell you more about that and more about this course and our experiences as the afternoon goes on.
Thanks. So before we start, since a big theme of today has been how do we learn and metacognition came up, we thought that we would start with a meta presentation. So we would reflect upon what we were told. Now we were getting very gentle guidance of the following thing that must hold true. And I'm not going to tell you who told us this, Deandra, that this is what has to hold true. Can y'all read that? Good, then I won't read it to you.
Who doesn't like Latin, Todd?
Huh?
Who doesn't like Latin?
The same kind of person who wouldn't like calculus too. People that would not even dare come to this talk. So no matter how much you hate this and everything we're going to talk about, we still have to give you takeaways, and that's what we're going to try to do. Okay?
No pressure.
So, no problem. All right. So, after we listened this morning, we realized that was when we should have written this talk. It was after we heard Dan. So, we inserted this slide to help us out a little. So, the first thing is that we wanted to list the goals that motivated us for doing this, whatever this is. You don't know what we did yet. But when you find out what we did, this is why we did it. And we did have goals long before we even met each other, right? So we're going to be talking about doing modularized, very self-directed, kind of flipped classes. Not that any of that's evidence-based, but one of the things that drove me, and I think drove you, was to be able to work with students one-on-one, because I do like working with students one-on-one. I feel like I have a higher impact with students one-on-one, and I often feel like that when a conversation comes up, especially a metacognition conversation comes up, it's in front of the class, and I have to treat it differently than I would treat it if I was talking to the student one-on-one. So that was one of the reasons. The curricula for both of us, often students could benefit from spending a little extra time in the beginning. When they walk in, we have I guess it's true for all of us, have a broad distribution of prior knowledge before they walk into the class. And we both have very specific sets of skills that we're depending upon them having, so they're starting in very different places. It's nice for the course to be a little more asynchronous than us all plowing along at the same pace. And one of the big things for both of us is that we have started, I guess we've been bitten by the metacognition bug and the cognitive science bug, and we would like to be able to make them more self-aware about how they are individual learners and their responsibilities as a learner. We would not, as Dan pointed out, use these approaches in all our classes. We don't use these approaches in all of our classes. And we are cheap and chancy authorities, as Dan said. So you can take that as you will. All right? So our first takeaway is to look up. When you're doing something different, I was walking down when I was teaching this strange class that we're going to be talking about teaching, I was walking down the hallway and I saw this other strange class that's right down the hall from me that has windows on the side, and I at first saw a teacher talking to herself, and then I realized it was her back was in a certain way, that it was Kristina talking to a class in a very weird way that I started making two and two, and I couldn't quite figure out what she was doing, so I finally walked in and asked her what she was doing. And what did we discover?
We discovered that we were doing pretty much the same thing. So a number of coffee conversations and huddles later, we decided, wait, we're both doing this sort of self-paced thing, students working sometimes on their own, sometimes in groups, working through content in a sort of flipped way. Other similarities, why can't we put Latin and Calc 2 students in the same room? And the same room is important because you actually stole the room from me. I realized that early this morning. Belk 208 was mine, and you stole it.
No,
which is why I was in 201.
You're saying
you
when I got
originally.
it, I had stole it from you.
Yes.
Laura is outside. She can actually
She can confirm
verify
that.
this.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons I came back to you and actually got serious about talking about doing the same room is because you stole it back.
Yes.
And so there is this very large teaching space where students can spread out and get into groups, and we can rearrange them. Many of you have been in that spot, and she stole it. And so I came back and said, oh, wouldn't it be a great idea if we both talked to the same space at the same time? I don't know how that actually went, but we came to that conclusion. I think I begged more than I said. That was a great idea. So we decided to teach Latin and calculus in the same space and making it a learning space more than just a classroom lecture space. All right? So what did we do in there? I want to talk about this pedagogy that allowed us to do that. And so I'm going to bring this picture up. Bergman and Sams are probably the people that I attribute the current concept of this mastery cycle flipping. I think they're high school chemists. If I'm wrong, then I'm the authority, so I'm not wrong. This picture, however, I saw this picture. It's childish, but I love it. And it comes off the Flipped Math website, and so I decided to use it again because I saw it at a Moodle conference. And it gives us a nice, it gives us something that's beyond just a mastery cycle, but a mastery cycle with, in my case, the mathematics or the science, the application, the learning part. It's not just the training part. And that kind of brings us to something that we both agree upon, that we are trying to do more than just, either in Latin or calculus 2, trying to just get them to memorize a bunch of things, but we actually want them to, there are skills to be learned, and beyond that, they need to hang those skills into a larger scaffold, to enrich that scaffold, to try to understand it in a bigger picture, to understand it under a culture, be it a mathematical culture or the Roman culture. So, all right, so to be specific, why don't you tell us about your class?
Okay. So to give this a little bit of contextualization, I've been teaching in some variation of this way for about 5 or 6 years. And to think about this in terms of, why would you do this? And it's going to sound like a lot of work, but it's actually not. It's less work than teaching traditionally. But in spring of 2011, I was teaching the second semester of our elementary Latin class, and I had 28 students. And some of you might be sitting here going, only 28 students, and some of you might be thinking, 28 students, which is what I thought. And I also thought, oh no. Because if any discipline sees this, but I think particularly in the languages and mathematics where learning is so cumulative, you can teach the first semester of a Latin class and students are all over the place in terms of their comprehension. If you look at a second semester class, you have students who here at least can place into the class. Maybe they had some high school Latin. Maybe they're seniors and haven't looked at Latin in 6 years. It's not good. Maybe you taught them in the fall, and so you have some sort of sense of where they are. But the point is that you really don't know, and students are at really disparate levels of capability, of comprehension, et cetera. So I had a conversation with Peter Felton, who said, well, go look at Scale Up, and also go look at what Ann Cahill is doing with step-by-step learning. So I did these things, and I came up with this sort of hybrid.
He didn't mention me at all.
Well, I didn't know you yet.
He didn't.
Oh, he didn't, no.
Where's
well,
Peter?
but you hadn't started doing this yet.
Thanks,
I think
Peter,
it's
wherever you are.
Yeah. So I looked at these things and I incorporated elements of both Scale Up and the step-by-step process. And what you see on this slide and what I'm talking about today, again, is this sort of iteration that's now 6 years later and in a much more multi-part, moving part sort of state than it was initially. But what all of that work brought me to was this. So students take what's a little bit renegade for languages, a very inductive approach to learning. There is no textbook. Has anybody here learned Latin? Yes. Learned Latin? Yeah, good. Does anybody remember Wheelock? Yeah. So Wheelock is a sort of traditional thing, or any book where here's the paradigm, here are some examples of it, go read some fake versions of this language, and then pretend you know what you're doing. I, for the last couple of years, have said this makes no sense. Why don't we take this inductive approach? And so we use a reader that has not a word of English in it. The only English is on the copyright page. Students see this and they freak out. But then you show them the first page, which basically says, Italy is in Europe, Rome is in Italy. And so boom, they're off and running. They have a subject, they have prepositional phrases, they have the verb to be, which is probably the most common verb in the language. And so this reader follows a narrative about a Roman family. There's all sorts of drama. The middle child is not a very good student, so we learn a lot about the Roman education system. And there are also little vignettes interspersed. So it's a very nice way of getting at both language and culture in this sort of bound up nexus. So that's the inductive component. It's also fundamentally collaborative. Students spend all of their time in class, and I encourage them to spend time out of class working with one another. It's very rare that a student is working on his or her own. So in class, this is another reason for the space. They're in these little groups. They put tables together. They come in and they immediately know who's working on what and who their peer group is. It's also self-paced. This is where the sort of step-by-step infusion, what it brought me to at least. Students progress individually. You can't take 20 students or 10 or 30 or 3,000 and say, you all will understand everything perfectly at every point along the way as we march through the textbook. So this allows students to spend more time on something that they might struggle with, less time on something that they can sort of pass right through, and it makes it okay to not be good or not get something right away. It makes failure, or it should make failure, and that sort of road to success, recovery from failure, something that everybody goes through at some point in the semester. And it gives them some flexibility, right? If you have a big paper, well, maybe that week Latin can go to the side a little bit, and it won't totally destroy my grade. So the course is peer supported in terms of that collaborative component, but it's also supported by a peer mentor. This is an advanced student who has taken the course and is there as a sort of coach. This person doesn't teach, they don't grade, they don't do anything administrative, but they're there as your sort of ears on the ground, and more than that, a support for the students. This person reads with them, works with them. It's also often the Latin tutor, so that's very helpful. In the past year, as part of this collaborative humanities redesign project, I introduced this flipped component. So there are a series of tasks on the Moodle site. I'll talk more about those a little bit later on. But what it does is alleviate the need to use class time, which is split up into groups. So the instructor and the peer mentor are both circulating around different learning groups the whole class. There's no giant lecture. There's no totally one-on-one usually, but working in these little pods. But what it does is allow that time to become focused on very engaged learning. What you talk about, or what I talk about with students in any given group, is based entirely on their questions from what they've learned formally on these Moodle tasks. There are frequent low-stakes assessments. Some of these show up in the tasks. Some of them are graded. Some of them aren't. They do things in class. They have challenges, which is what I call tests, because it sounds much more exciting. You've conquered your challenge. That's the email I get to send. Very Roman, too. Conquered it. And it's also gated. So students demonstrate their mastery of one content set, usually a chapter, or before they move on to the next. So you can't get to chapter 10 without showing to yourself, more than you're showing to me, really, that you have understood chapters 1 through 9. It's also very reflective. I've become more and more interested in the metacognitive component, and so students complete weekly sort of self-evaluations about how they did, what they accomplished, what they didn't, and why. That question of why is one that they come back to again and again. And there are also reflective elements built into the tasks themselves. So how well do you think you understand what you've read in this chapter in task 2, and then later on at the end, now that you've gotten all this formal instruction, what do you think you know, what questions do you have, and what can you do about it? And what can your peers do, and what can the instructor do? So that was my very long spiel about elementary Latin, but it connects in many ways to what Todd was doing.
I learned something from that, something new. I always learn something from you, is that the reason why Peter didn't mention me is you've been doing it about twice as long as me. I've only been doing it 3 years, so there I go. So I've used her format here to kind of just throw in the things that are true about my Calculus 2 class. I do something different than having a narrative. I like the idea of maybe some kind of, and this is used in math currently is a hot idea, is having some big problem that requires all these pieces that you build upon to go towards that problem. Now, those of you who are familiar with Calc, actually, you asked about Latin. How many of you have had an experiences with Calc 2? Well, I know you. So more Greek than Latin. I like it. I actually have one of my students in here. So, it's one of those classes that that make people cry, make them reconsider their careers, all sorts of things. It's kind of like organic chemistry, I think. I do not like the idea of a weeding course. I understand there is kind of a standard way in America, at least, as to what is supposed to be in Calculus 2. There's about 5 topics. They're not so well intertwined that the students can see why they're put together. It is kind of like an attic closet full of things that you need, I guess someone said you need to know. But I have done something, and I'll explain in a second, about kind of switching things up and getting this interleaving to happen, where they're coming back to things that they've seen before. I do not force collaborative peer work, but they tend to do that. They tend to group themselves to where the others are at, and they will split apart when one group kind of moves forward. Then some may find that even if they're friends, they should be in another group. Believe it or not, some math people are antisocial, and they don't want to be with anybody. I try to discourage that by sitting beside of them, and then they get up and move to the next class, and I go sit beside of them.
I've seen it happen.
Right. Or in the big room, so she was on one side, but there was no divider or anything. It's just a big room. She was on one side, and I was on the other, and I have them pulled. If they wanted, if I allowed it, they would have chairs and tables everywhere, kind of like your group, but your group's kind of sociable. They're like normal human beings. But my group would just spread out as far as they could to the walls. So I have like 2 long tables, and I have just enough tables with just enough chairs so if they sit beside each other, they're all next to each other. So they have to kind of be close to each other and such. That was not true in your room. That was an experimental room. But y'all were close to each other too, because it was a small room. I do not, how did you get the money to have a peer mentor?
It was my Cattle Scholar Award. It wasn't, it's not departmental.
I need to be a little nicer to Deandra. Sorry. Okay, that's good, that's good. This would have been nice, I think, to have someone who has taken that class. Maybe, would you like to be a peer scholar?
Sure.
Yeah, we'll have to, okay. Certainly flipped instruction. We both agree on the frequent low stakes assessments. You know how people freak out on math tests. You know it. It's a big deal. If you make them low stakes, meaning if they take it and they fail it, they can take it again and they can take it again. You just set the bar high so it is gated to move on. I don't have a reflection piece. Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
I'll reflect upon that and see how I can change it. Maybe I'll talk to Catalyst and see what they say about that. Why did it go that way? Oh, because I pushed the wrong button. Okay, so let me tell you what I do that's a little different is that, so there's 5 chapters. They go through all 5 chapters. There's one on the geometry with integration. There's one on sequences and series. They also have to learn Mathematica, which is kind of new for a lot of things. So this is a computation and visualization software. But they go through all 5 chapters in one wave, and they have to do it linearly in order. And I try to stay away from the word of mastery, because that just seems too much. So I use the word familiarity, so they do a lot. Most of that cycle is familiarity, and then when they take the gated and pass the gated exam, it becomes proficiency, right? And I think we can all feel better about that word. So they go through this material, and they go through all 5 chapters, beginning sections of each one. And then they come back through the 5 chapters again, doing the more advanced material, and to give them a more feeling of independence, they can do it in any order they want. So they may decide to come back and do this one, which is the more advanced of the last one they did, or they may be shooting for more easy, fast points to fill themselves, because each one of these is worth about 10 points. So they need to nail down 8 of these just to be in a good passing range. And then the final is over all that material, which I call a strong familiarity. It's not the same thing as proficiency, but a strong familiarity.
So there are some ways in which what happens in Latin mimics this. So they, in the fall, for example, they cover 15 chapters of material. But again, we're using a book that isn't so like, here's every relative pronoun in existence. Have fun with that. or every form of this verb, but this reader introduces things piecemeal. So on the one hand, it is very ordered, but on the other hand, they're not getting everything at once. So if you learn two out of 6 forms in chapter 3, maybe you get the other 4 in chapter 9. And so you have to go back, and you've been constantly using those 2 in the interim chapters. So it does sort of mix. And I don't have a final exam. You have to complete all the challenges to pass the course. You also have to do a composition project. And this is where this other sort of interleaving and going back comes in. One component of this composition project is an inventory where they have to go back and create for themselves, again, an inventory of everything that they had learned in terms of grammar and culture. So they have to order it. So by chapter 15, perhaps you have learned all of the relative pronouns. Make that chart. So you're not pulling it out of Wheelock or another textbook, you're creating it for yourself. But they also have to, for the actual composing process, identify 3 areas or concepts that were particularly challenging for them and incorporate them into the draft and into the various written products. So there are ways in which that cumulative assignment has them review the material to get at, I think, similar goals.
I think so. But, I'm glad you used the word interleaving. That was one of the...
Yeah.
We did not win. I did not win, by the way. I was not a teaching ninja. But if we keep the interleaving up, we will. Who was the teaching ninja winners? Where are they? Good on you, 67% librarian team. Good on you. I'm jealous they cheated. All right, so why are we doing this? Before we get into how we use technology and other things to do this, we would like to talk about why we do this. One of the reasons, one of the big reasons, and that's one-on-one engagement. I was tired. I love to lecture. You probably can tell that. I'm the one who would like to throw the thing at you, even if it wasn't a speaker. But I feel, and at Elon, if you stay here long enough and do undergraduate research and do other things like this, that one-on-one engagement with the student is, there's no replacement for it. And when a student, if they do well, and I can say, congratulations, and we talk a little while, and I say, oh, well, what did you mess up on? And you talk about that for a bit, and there's that reinforcement of this is important, or you do poorly, and I pick on you, and you come back, and you make that 100, and you get in my face and go, that is something that you want to happen. You want the students to take grip of and be proud of. Or if they fail a few times and they sit down and say, this is not teaching, or I'm not learning, what do I need to do? That is really a conversation where it's right then I want to talk to them. I don't want to say, well, come to my office hour and we'll go in this dark room or whatever. I want to talk to them right then, right after the exam, and go through it and work with them and talk about it. Or if they really are stumped and their peers can't help them, I want to talk to them and help with them. And you showed me that it's even nicer to have kind of a quiet room. Often I will sit down right beside them and talk to them, maybe not about personal things, but talk to them about a problem, and there'll be a couple of others kind of leaning in and listening. So those who don't necessarily like to talk to me. Now they will say, that's not teaching, that's office hours all the time, but it is teaching, it's one-on-one engagement. That's my favorite part of that.
I would echo everything that you just said, and I think what's useful about compelling the collaborative element is that, again, sometimes they end up in one-person groups, but often they're with at least one other person. And so if they're struggling, the other person's probably struggling. Yeah. But they might be struggling on different things, and so they help one another. And the conversations you hear in that room are just, and your side too, are just fantastic, because it's, how did you do this? Well, I thought this was this, and so why did you say that? It's these higher order questions that are motivating what they're doing in class. Maybe, I don't know so much about out of class, but in class, that's what they're focused on.
We can't control it.
Yeah. Well, I see it in the task a little bit. So I think another way in which, and you can flip to the next slide if you want, the one-on-one engagement is really helpful with the peer mentor. This was a much longer slide. I was told to shorten it by someone who will remain unnamed. But the most recent peer mentor from the class had written up her experience, and I put a couple quotations up there for you to give you a sense of, in her own words, what that looks like. From my perspective, the peer mentor really is a pivot. He or she tells me, again, what's going on the ground, what the students think, what they might be afraid to say to me. My last name is Meinking. Sometimes I like to joke that I'm Mean King. I don't think so. But it gives me a way of really knowing what they're thinking, what they're anxious about when they hit that time in the semester where they're looking at what they have left to do relative to the number of days left in the semester. And she is a tremendous resource for them as well as for me, and sort of going between the two, not groups, but sort of the instructor on the one hand and the students on the other. I think that's all I wanted to say about that for now.
Okay, so let's get into how a lot of this is how I actually pull this off. Though this first part is common between the two of us. We use Moodle at Elon, and we both use it deeply. So it's kind of like the main structure. It's where our students are at. It's where we communicate with the students. It's where we give them tasks. We have lots of conditional statements. You have to learn about it. You can't just be, you just can't throw things up there. You really do have to spend some time with it. And actually, I think we've got one of your slides up. If you want to talk about what that is.
So I mentioned the tasks earlier, and so in thinking about how to use technology and how to use Moodle, this is just an example of the structure of the tasks from the first chapter. So you see that there are 6 of them. The first one is always to read the chapter in the reader. The second is a reading journal where they respond to a number of prompts. The third is a series of podcasts from the Prodigy. And they're usually very short. And the reason for the podcasts is from the students. The peer mentor had asked and surveyed a number of them, would you prefer videos, or what is the best media by which to deliver this content? And categorically, students said podcasts. They can take it with them, they can bring it to the gym, put it in their car, do whatever. And they're short, they're usually 1 to 3 minutes long, and they give a sort of grammatical overview. In terms of English grammar, it's not, here's exactly what this looks like in Latin, and write it down. It's here's what it looks like in English, now go find it in what you read in Latin for today. So that's that third task. The fourth is a concept check where they practice what they've learned. It's not graded. It gives them feedback. The fifth is this culture and context to help work toward an intercultural competency goal where they read and learn about something related to what's going on in the world of the chapter. And then the sixth one is the synthesis. So in terms of what students are producing in these tasks, numbers 2 and 6 are the most important. And they give me not just a sense of what they understand in terms of content, but how they're feeling and what their questions are in the course.
So with me, I use Webassign, which is out of NC State. It started out of NC State, and it's attached to our textbook. We use a standard calculus textbook now called, from the author Stewart. I will say that OpenStax has finally come out with a calculus book that covers Calc 1 and 2, and they've also got a deal with Webassign, and so I will definitely be looking at that. But what that allows is that when they have a deal with Webassign, Webassign will also totally give them an electronic textbook if they buy it. Well, it comes with it whether they want it or not. Now, how we sell the textbook is loose leaf, and it's a lot cheaper if you sell it loose leaf. And then they can put small, you know what a calculus book is like. It's like a large weight. They can put single sections in a binder and bring it with them. And it is true that some students like paper, or maybe in the end they decide they like paper. I know I would never contradict Dr. Dan about anything, but when he said about 80% of the students, anytime someone uses the word 80%, I'm like, well, I don't know. But 80% of the students prefer books over the ebook. I'm not sure about that. It seems like they just don't prefer books, period. They would rather start with the, that's more honest. They like to start with the problems and then go to the books when they can't do something. So I use Webassign. I use a large stratified sampling, so it's possible, well, it's absolutely the case that every student will work just tons of different challenges, but they will work different challenges and a large intersection of challenges. So you'll look next door to someone and they're working on another problem that's kind of like that. And yours is paper, right?
The assessments are, or the challenges are. And another, we were talking about this earlier, I think another interesting thing is what you just said, right? So you're in class and your students are working on the Moodle site or the Webassign. I don't allow that. I say that all the tasks, everything has to be done before you get to class, so that the classroom space is engagement with one another. So it's another interesting.
Yeah, and for me, I tell them, especially after the first site, that I want them to come to class no matter what. And if they haven't looked at the video or whatever, bring your headphones. I want you in the class doing something productive towards that. And some of them will do that. Many of the students will start watching the videos and doing whatever they can out of class and then work on problems in class because that's more productive. They can work with each other then. For the applications, then there's harder problems that come up in the Webassign, and there's projects, a couple of projects that pop up using this is my shorthand for Mathematica, and the tools that they have to use in Mathematica get tougher and tougher, and I assume that they can use those to do some of the, they absolutely have to have the tools of the Mathematica to do some of the problems. So the mastery check, yours is by paper. They go into another room in quiet room. Mine sit there and take it on Webassign with immediate feedback of whether they passed or not. They have to make an 85%. There are issues of whether there's cheating or whatever. I had promised myself that I wouldn't worry about that right now. On the next revision, I'll worry about it, but you can get so caught up in that it can just suck your will to live. So I'll just... I like to trust you. I know you cheated, but I know the rest of them, they're not trusted. Now this last one, you've given me some real pause because I love Screencast-O-Matic because once you get it right, once you get it down that 15 minutes, not the hour, that 15 minutes of just the perfect explanation. Doesn't mean the students understand it. Doesn't mean you got it right, but at least you're satisfied. Yes, okay, I'm almost done. Once you're satisfied with it, you put it up on YouTube. I am done. I'm getting ready. I promise. Right? But you use podcasts. Now, why did you decide to use podcasts?
As I was saying before, it's the students who really said, I'd rather have something portable that I can, that's short and sweet. I can take notes. I can just walk across. I'm sure that all of my Latin students walk across campus jamming out to Latin podcasts and not to anything else.
I like that. I get it.
There you go. Yes. That'll work. But no, it really came from, my initial knee-jerk reaction was videos, all the things you can do. And then they all came back and said, no, we don't want to see anything.
Would you like calculus lectures and just me talking?
The videos are helpful because you had like diagrams and like equations, so it's much easier for languages to use that word, but for calculus.
You've already passed the class and you're still talking nice. That's great. That's awesome. You're going for that peer mentor job. I know what's going on. Yeah.
Well, on the other hand, I mean, to that point, so I think parts of languages are easier with just words and without images. But if you're trying to show a construction, it is like showing an equation. And I think part of what's a minor difference in our classes, another one, is that in those podcasts, I'm just giving them a framework. I'm saying this is what indirect speech is in English. It's reported speech or thought. Go find some in Latin. Then tell me what it looks like in Latin. Instead of here's how the whole thing works. I'm mean. He's much nicer. Meinking.
That's
there
right.
You go.
That's right. I am a nice guy. Yeah. That's right. Actually, one of the things I do want to do is on my lectures, because I use Screencast-O-Matic, it's not me in front of a board. Most of the time I'm in Mathematica, and the students really need to see Mathematica used. The learning curve is steep, so they need to see me using it as much as possible. But I like the idea of that podcast. I do. So we're almost there at the end. So whoever was ringing the alarm, we know that. I do not mean this in a derogatory way. This is actually, we're repeating what Dan said, and that is that it is so much fun to get cool tools like this one, right? You don't have to turn it on. You don't have to turn it on. It's so cool to get new tools and clickers and figure out how to use them. And some of us, like me, it's our job to figure out maybe neat ways of using them. But by and large, what we should be doing is figuring out what we're trying to accomplish and then looking around and talk. Hopefully you have teams as wonderful as our teams that can, like Catalyst and TLT, that can help us find the right tools. And sometimes the right tools is pencil and paper. or us. And sometimes the right tools are expensive, and we can't afford them at the moment. And sometimes they're there, and we've got them, and we just don't know about them because they're stuck in the library, and we haven't gone and asked the librarian, and that's completely our fault. So weigh the options on the tools.
I think by the same token, how, it's sort of an obvious statement, but how you use the tools. So the tasks in Moodle, it's the last thing I'll say about them, I promise. They came about because students didn't have any real formal pre-class work. Gasp, shock, horror, everyone falls down. So there's no homework in the class. Everything was based on what they did in class with me and their performance on challenges. So we introduced the tasks as a way of saying, no, there has to be, it's really hard to say, go be an independent learner, but I'm going to structure everything you do. So this was a sort of midway point, I think a way of saying, all right, I'm going to impose some structure because you have to complete the tasks before we can talk about the material, before you can take the challenge, before you can move on, so you don't fail the class, right? But even within the tasks, and this is, Dan Rice gets a shout out for all his help with this last summer, they're gated. So you can't do task 3 until you've submitted task 2. You can't do task 5 until you've done 1 through 4. And I think that's made a really big difference in breaking down the learning process and preventing students from doing what I would have wanted to do, and which I still do in a lot of ways. Just give me what I want to know so I can do the thing and move on, right? Not everyone's going to major in classics, although they should. And so this is a nice way, I think, of saying, all right,
Classical mathematics.
That's the next step.
Oh,
that's what
okay.
we're doing next.
Oh, classical mathematics?
Yeah, next year.
Oh,
I meant to tell you.
you.
It'll be in Greek.
Done.
It'll be great, yeah. No, so I do think it's a really nice way of sort of tweaking what they're doing and how they're doing it without being too heavy-handed and taking away too much of their independence and their self-directedness in the class.
And that segues us into both of us liking the idea of mini low-stakes assessments. Students, I've read articles, I don't know what that is. But I've read articles about brain scans of people who are getting ready to take analytic exams, like in physics or in math, and the reptilian parts of their brains are kicking off, and their fight and flight is going. They're ready, and I've seen students who look like they're getting ready to either to run out of the classroom or attack me, one or the other, and they're just like, they're not doing math, they're just trying to decide which one of those things they're going to do. But I think even the best student would agree that when they when they get ready to take an exam and they know they want to do their best, there's a lot of pressure to do really well that first time. The bar is set high, they have to do really well, but they know that if they don't, they get another shot at it. That just is a whole different world. And they can start using reasonable scientific strategies. They can work a reasonable amount of the homework. They're required to do so many problems, but they don't have to do all of them. And then they can come into class and say, hey, I'm going to take the exam, just to see where I'm at. I understand that I may not pass. I just want to see, where I'm at. And they take it, and they see where they're at. They might make a 65 or something. They go, oh, I think I have a feel for what I need to work on. A couple of classes later, they take it, ace it. Nail it, right? And it allows interleaving because there can be stuff in these problems. You feel more enabled to put things in there that you might think, oh, that's kind of sneaky to put in an exam if it's a midterm. And you're like, oh, they're all going to fail that. But if you put it in there and you know that they get second, third, fourth, however many chances they need, your guilt just goes floating away. And then they come to you and say, that wasn't in the homework. You're like, oh, well then, but now you know. Now you know. Go figure it out. So it's always good when you feel less guilty.
I think on a similar note, with the challenges, I should have said this before, they can take them up to 3 times. And so they have that same experience of, well, I thought I knew this really well, so I took the challenge and I got a 25. Well, now you know what you need to work on. And they get the same day feedback from me. So they'll get an email saying, if you didn't conquer the challenge, you did really well on English to Latin composition, but you really need to pay more attention to X, Y, and Z constructions. I suggest doing A, B, and C. And it becomes, again, more of a conversation, right? That one-on-one engagement, even in feedback on the same day that they take the assessment.
Now, what happens after the third time?
Doesn't happen.
Huh? It doesn't?
No, if it does, it's usually
it happens, though.
It's so small that you just have them repeat it, and then it's fine. Yeah.
So here's the last slide. See, and I am so proud of us. Look.
Yeah.
We rock.
You've got 3
yes, we rock. But this is the toughest slide because this is the truth. All of you, well, actually, you may be the ones that this is not true about, but our students and their parents and many of our colleagues and most all of our administrators all have very deeply ingrained beliefs about what teaching and learning is. And it's not necessarily true, right? I'm not saying I know the truth. I just know the following. When I walked in, like so many of my colleagues, and I can win teaching awards at every level, my students can love me, and they're like, oh, he's so interesting, and da-da-da, and you're so cool because you wear all the math shirts, and you fail. This is not true here because I'd lose my job, but at Texas Tech, it was, when I was a teacher there, a failure rate of half your class was not unheard of at all. That was about right. Easily. And you don't have to go to Texas Tech. This is not a Texas thing. Well, those Texans are stupid, right? You can go down the road to State, and I'm sure that it's not true, by the way. But you can go down to NC State, and I'm sure that their failure rate in Calc 2 is very high, right? And you can just say, well, either they learn it or they don't. But doesn't it seem like when you've got a room full of students who are extremely bright, and that it feels like that if you can just find the right time and find the right way, that a lot more of them can learn it, that you're just failing somehow, not just you, but the system is failing somehow, figuring out a better way. Maybe you need, maybe semesters. I think semesters is one of the issues, but there's just got to be some way where more of them can honestly learn the material and without cutting out the material. I mean, there is one way of making them do well, and that's just cutting out a bunch of the material. But we don't want to do that, because then they got to take Calc 3, and they're like, I've never heard of Taylor series, and I've never heard of integration. Integration? What is that? No, that won't work. But it's very, and it certainly wouldn't work with language if they don't have a vocabulary or anything. But there's just got to be a better way. And I'm not saying I found the better way. You're not saying you found the better way. But the problem is even if I do think I have found a better way, to be honest. I do think this is a better way. The problem is passing it on. I have no colleagues who wants to pass this on. And I don't want to teach Calc 2 forever. So what do I do? I don't know. What do? Do you have colleagues who's ready to teach Latin?
Not yet. No, I was just saying.
Do you have language colleagues in here right now?
I have language colleagues. I don't have Latin colleagues.
Oh, okay.
That's what I was doing. No, I think I totally lost the train of thought when you put me on the spot.
What do you do?
But the question of what do you do? The deeper learning, the authentic learning component, I think is what you see in these classes that makes them different from ways I've traditionally taught Latin, at least. And I think that there are elements of both of our courses and their structures that might not be the best or a better way to do something you might already be doing, but they might help you think about a certain problem in a different way. I think there are sort of transferable elements. At least in conversations with faculty and colleagues in my department and elsewhere, I've seen people say, oh, well, that can translate to this. So even though I think we're looking at two very specific courses and two crazy people who taught in the room together for a semester, the sort of takeaways are in fact takeaways. I think there are principles that you can take to your courses that I hope at least would enhance what you're doing and the learning that you're seeing in your students.
If I were to take Latin, I'd definitely take it under you. For sure.
Thank you.
And that's it, folks. Thanks you for listening to us. No. Remember, Deandra said it. She will take away your cattle grant if you don't throw it. Is that right there? Throw it to him. Throw it to him. Throw it to him. That was awesome.
So I have a quick comment and then a question. So the quick comment is I'm going to struggle with the whole grade thing because you're right. It seems like there should be some finite amount of information. And if they learn that, then they get their grade. And if everybody does that, then maybe everybody gets an A. And I struggle with that because GPA is rising. So that's kind of a comment I don't know the answer.
And that's a
to
real
that.
issue.
But the question I have is, my sister has kids in middle school, and they have this new thing where want to make everyone feel good about themselves, right? So they can kind of pick how hard they work. And so if they want to get a C, they have to do this much work, and they want to get a B, they do this much work. Whatever, right? And so how do you combat that? Because people take as much as they want. Well, screw it. I got my C. I'm done with my calculus. How do you care how do you get people to go beyond that? If they can do it a couple times, do they just stop and give up?
I do not care, and I don't see it often. I think that the students who get to see are extremely angry about it. The reason why is they have known from the very beginning the path. There's no excuses. It's so, I mean, one of the things that we both have done is read things like the listing on Carnegie Mellon's site that I think Deandra turned me to, and de-think about, look, there's very specific things that we know. List off and be specific what students have to do. And when you do that and they see it and they just can't accomplish it, and they can just get, but if they really just want that C, fine. That's their prerogative. That's part of independent learning, is allowing them to decide.
I have to finish my
You've got to throw it all the way over there. How does the throwing work? Who is the thrower? Bam! I like it.
So I'm Brandon Essery, teach Italian here at the Elon. And
Woo! Elon.
Elon is
Yes.
good. You're all here, you know this.
That's a colleague of yours.
I know.
Is this like a plant?
No.
Oh, okay.
It
I
came
can't
from-
believe how wonderful this whole idea is.
I don't work like you.
So no, this came from your presentation, which was very stimulating. Thank you both for it. But one of the things I do beyond my language teaching is Renaissance and medieval Italian literature, and it's gravitating towards teaching these two fields, medieval and Renaissance literature, with video games. And it is very striking that all of these qualities you list here, collaborative, self-paced, frequent low stakes, gated, these all are fundamental parts of video game design.
Absolutely.
Good games teach the way you're teaching. That there are others, okay, in the field of game design. But that's my comment. The question would be, video games are very good at using these tools to make students more competitive, to make players students, okay? Is there any competitive element in the way you do these things? If not, what effect might that have? You said challenge instead of test. You're leveling up instead of getting grades. What do you think? Because all of them are. It's fascinating.
You know, it's really interesting. There's a two-part response to that. I haven't seen, and I sort of expected to see, we're in the number one group, like we're furthest along, and then the lowest group is, you know, some shamed walking in late or something. But what I've actually seen, honest to goodness, is students helping one another more than anything. The first semester I tried this, there were students that finished early, and they kept coming back. I was like, really? Like, you're done. You know, I have 25 other students. But they kept coming back and either kept reading on their own or were there working with other students. And I didn't have a peer mentor then, so that might have been part of it. We've been through the gauntlet, we can help. So I'm seeing more collaboration, right, and help than anything else. And even when I added that little bit in the Moodle site that says your rank in the class, or, you know, based on progress, I did it and nothing. There's no, I'm number one, I need to stay number one, or I'm only number 12 or something like that. There was a second response to that I can't remember now. But yeah, I haven't seen it.
Okay.
That reminds me to add something that I've added to my class. I cannot believe I didn't put a slide or something in, but I think it made a big difference. And you can say, one, it is kind of competitive, a little, right?
Yeah, I mean, it felt good to be one of the more advanced.
Right. But you didn't like jump up and take your sword and knock the others out and grief them like you have no armor, right? But one thing I do is that every night after class, I take where the people, I load down the data from Moodle. So there's the whole issue of analytics, micro and macro analytics. And it's such a pain to get it from Moodle, but I know that my technology folks are working on that, and the Catalyst is working on that because we want the data. And I take the data down as to where each student's at, how many of the tests they've gotten, how many of the modules they have finished, so that I can know what module are they on the 6th, on the 7th, on the 8th, and I put a graph of what percentage of the two classes put together. I was teaching 2 classes of Calculus 2. What percentage of the class was working at each level at the top of the Moodle site every day, and constantly reminded them. So there was no, I was enforcing this idea of where, and I had lines on there that were pace lines. If you intended to do all 10 modules by the end of the class, here's where you needed to be. So they could look at that and immediately see, and they would talk about it. I'm ahead of the pace line. I'm behind the pace line. I even color-coded it, so if they're in front, they were green. If they're in the middle, they're blue. There was yellow, and then back here was red. And they would make comments about the red. I'm like, don't, that could be your classmate. So you have to worry about things like that, but I really do think it's important for them to know exactly where they are, and I think it made a difference to them. I had students saying, look, I'm in yellow, that's got to stop. I've got to move up. I've got a plan now. I'm going to get this one done, the next week I'm going to get the next one done. So I think giving them data back is important.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Did you find that sort of, I need to move up, I need to plan this all out, put them into sort of like analysis paralysis where they were focused more on that than on actually doing the work ahead of them?
It's better than just, I have the other student who, my bigger fear is the student that when they're self-directed, they just kind of let things go till the end and then it's too late. That's the thing. I'd rather them freak out a little now or at midterm. At midterm, I gave the grade as to where they were on this. And I had students that came in and said, my parents went out, I'm like, well, look, you're at D pace right now. If you keep up at this pace, you're going to make a D. And then I do one thing. I'd rather them freak out now than 2 weeks in, they're trying to take a test on each topic every period. So, yes, analysis paralysis. I never heard of that. Analysis is good for you. I don't know why you would say something like that. It just takes I'm not going to make you throw it way back there. Have you played Dark Souls?
Everybody does.
No, that's a good game. Where are you back there? Oh, I think I'm going to just kind of do three what?
Can you talk a little bit about the startup costs? How much do you have, to get all these challenges and questions and third exam, fourth exam? Yeah, how'd you do that all before the start of the semester?
As I said, I've been working on this in various ways for about 6 years. The only part, and you might be able to correct me on this, since you've read so much. Well, no, we're very fortunate to have a CADL, Center for the Advancement of Teaching and Learning Scholar Program, which is a 2-year award, which carries with it course releases and other funds. So I was very fortunate to have one of those from 2013 to 15, which allowed me to hire the peer mentor and work with that, and then extended a little bit into last summer of 2015 still, so it's okay, to do the podcasts. And we've had wonderful help in technology. But otherwise, it didn't cost anything of time. But the sort of front-loading time you put into it pays off because you're using at least a version of it for every iteration of the course. And the giving of feedback that's student and challenge specific seems like it takes a really long time, but it's so much, it doesn't really when you stack it up to like grading 2 midterms and a final or something. And the resulting engagement and what the student gets out of that is so much richer that even if it did take a little bit more time, I'd still do it. But it didn't, for me at least, we did everything ourselves pretty much. And I'm very cheap and chancy and authoritative.
It took all summer for me to get the first wave of videos and to put it together, and then after that, you're constantly building into it. But on the other end, there was less grading. I definitely would worry about some professors getting this and then just not doing anything, just kind of, right? And here's the thing, is that your colleagues will think you're doing that whether you're not, so that's frustrating. But it took me a summer to get the videos together and all. And I was offered support and such. Elon's very good about that. So.
And
That's not even true. I was also given a microphone, and I was given training for that, and advice. I actually took a lot of the time of the TLT folks. And now that I think about it, I went over to our Center of Teaching and Learning and bent their ears till I'm sure they were very tired of it. So I took a lot of their time, too. That's money, I guess. Do y'all get salaries? So that was money.
What I think what's neat about mine, and I don't want to speak for you here.
Don't speak for me.
Anybody can have what I've done. I mean, if you want it, you can have it. You want to learn Latin,
Absolutely.
I'll add you to the Moodle site. But if you're not from Elon, apparently you need a background check. But I found this out last year. Don't know. But no, I think that's, I
That
mean,
was
when
my fault, sorry. They didn't used to, the thing I got on there. I need a background check.
But no, I mean, really, like, if colleagues, I don't necessarily think or know anybody that would want it, but if somebody did in Latin, obviously specifically, they can take it. You can take the framework, take the Moodle structure, and just import your own content. It's all transferable and free, and use it.
Anybody teaching Calc 2, you can have it. And even if you didn't want my videos, you know how much material's out there. But there's something deep down where you want to make your own.
I can ask one more question. I'll just yell it. So, it obviously makes sense for practice in Latin because there's a build, right?
Absolutely.
Something like marketing, I don't necessarily know if there is a build per se, because you could probably teach the textual kind of order and it would work, kind of okay, there's maybe some few basic things. So how would it work in those kind of settings where there's not really an obvious build, where you have to master certain things before you get to the...
I would never use this in my proof class or any of my advanced math classes. I just wouldn't. I have other techniques.
And when you say the drawback is, why are you saying that?
Yeah, I guess I just end the story there and then don't even move forward. I think those classes tend to be smaller. The skill sets tend to be deeper, conceptual, and I like other ways that I do things. I like being able to work with them as kind of a small family. There's maybe 10 students and and we are all talking those kinds of issues. Like with the proof class, we'll have a problem, someone will present the proof, and then I'll have all of them try to write up the proof, and then we'll talk about the different proofs. It's not modularized. I would be a little afraid to modularize that. Yeah. There's nothing inside of me that says a go, but that doesn't mean someone else won't think of a way and go, oh yeah, you can do that. I just don't think I don't think that Khan's Academy can work for everything.
I could foresee doing it in upper level Latin literature courses or components of it, so not exactly the same way, but I think there are, again, and because you can modularize different parts of it. It can be the grammar or the content, or it can be scholarship. I think there are different ways to sort of play with the framework and export it, but I'd have to think through more of it.
You've been doing it longer, you're better.
I don't know about that. But I was thinking, as a sort of final response to your question, this sort of richness of conversation, and this is something that came out of what you said too, I think outweighs the need for startup costs. So if you have people around you can find people around you to talk through your ideas with and be inspired by. So another thing that came up is the Collaborative Humanities Redesign Project. And while there wasn't funding directly supporting this project, the conversations I had, the sort of ways I've thought about the course and incorporating culture and flipped content has completely transformed what this course looks like now as opposed to 4 years ago or 2 years ago. So people, in a way, I think are more helpful than money at some point.
And there's the huge salary boost we get for doing classes like this later, right?
Are there? You're holding out on me.
Hey folks, thank you very much. Thank you.